Broadcasting live from Forward Observer Central Command in Austin, Texas. It's the man always out front on the issues. You're listening to Out Front with Samuel Culper.
Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to Out Front. I'm your host, Samuel Culper. We start off today's show with a somber note. Rush Limbaugh passed away this morning, and he played an important role in my life. Growing up, I was a big Rush fan. In fact, I can remember being in the third grade and lying to my parents about being sick just so I could stay home and listen to the Maharishi, the Doctor of Democracy, the professor at the Limbaugh Institute for Advanced Conservative Studies, El Rushbo himself. It's a little Spanish lingo there. For those of you in Rio Linda, that's Rush Limbaugh. So here's to you, Rush. You are going to be missed. On today's show, I'm going to talk about our gray zone future because the United States has a gray zone. We'll get into that in a moment, but first I just want to share with you some thoughts and really a story about what's happened here in Central Texas over the past few days. Now, as you may have heard, as some of you may have lived, we had some snow and ice come through. The polar vortex illegally crossed into the United States from the northern border, ran a red light, T-boned right into a low-pressure system right in the middle of the intersection here in Texas, and it dumped a fair amount of snow and ice, and about half of Texas lost power. Not literally, but millions did lose power with freezing temperatures, sometimes sub-zero temperatures, and there's extensive water damage in many homes from burst pipes, and folks are going to be recovering from this for a while. As a matter of fact, it's Wednesday, and some guys on our Forward Observer staff still don't have power, or the power will come back on for 30 minutes and then cut off again for a few hours. So this is still ongoing, and apparently at least some people, I think we're scheduled to get a bit more precipitation, freezing rain and sleet, and maybe some snow tonight and into tomorrow morning. Now, on a side note, I spent some time on Friday and Saturday texting and talking with neighbors about this storm. Really, I mean, one of the absolute best things you can do for emergency preparedness, especially the stuff I talk about, which is trying to build a little bit of community involvement. One of the best things you can do is get your phone numbers get the phone numbers from your neighbors. And so this was a good opportunity for me to go door to door to basically say, look, we have this storm. And actually, I looked a bit prophetic, although I wasn't. Anytime you get ice, especially in the South, I grew up in the South, anytime you get ice, you're going to probably run into downed power lines. And so I just started asking neighbors, hey, what's your plan if we do have, in the worst case scenario, let's say we do lose power for a couple of days, and, what's your plan? And one of my neighbors has some small kids, and I asked what his plan was. What was he going to do if we lost power? And it was 5 degrees outside and 20 degrees inside. And he didn't have a plan, but he thanked, I'm not doing this to pat myself on the back, but he thanked me for bringing that to his attention because that's something he hadn't even considered. Now, I don't think he lost power. And if he did, certainly not for a couple of days. But many Texans did. Maybe millions of Texans did. And if he is indicative of the average resident, then millions of people simply were not prepared for this. And this is a very good time to talk about something called off-model risk. Now, by far the worst loss in casino history. Sometimes I'll ask students this. And, people say, the worst loss in casino history. They lost $1 million. They lost $5 million or $10 million. No. The worst casino loss in world history was over $100 million. In 2003, you may have heard of these two dudes named Siegfried and Roy. Well, one of their little magic shows was ended when a performing tiger mauled illusionist Ray Horn. He's not a magician. He's an illusionist. That ended the show's multi-million-dollar run. In addition to other damages, the end of that show and the other damages cost that casino over $100 million. Risk managers at the casino, they'd taken out an insurance policy in case the tiger attacked an audience member. But they failed to consider a type of off-model risk, a black swan, if you will. They did not take an insurance policy out on a tiger attacking Siegfried or Roy. In his book, The Black Swan, Nassim Nicholas Taleb discusses off-model risk. And ever since I've read that book, it's been a concept that I've tried implementing into my own preparedness planning. Because, we go through the checklists, maybe we have some ideas of some additional considerations during a snow and ice storm, because they're so rare here in Texas. But who knew? I did not know. Who knew that frozen instruments and components on oil and gas wellheads and pipelines would have caused them to shut down, which depressurized other gas lines, which led to electrical generation failures and cascading power outages? Now, Texas gets about 25% of its power from wind turbines. You may have seen the story about frozen wind turbines being the cause of this energy catastrophe. Well, that's probably true to some level, but that's certainly not the primary cause. The primary cause, actually, Dan Crenshaw, who's a representative out of Houston, pointed this out, that some sensors on a nuclear power plant froze up. And one of these safety features on this nuclear power plant is it shuts down if that sensor is not working, because it can't tell the people who run that plant that everything's okay. So one of the sensors froze, the whole nuke plant shut down. And then you also had wellheads and these oil and gas pipelines basically shut down for the same reasons. Components just started freezing up because it was, -5 degrees or it was 3 degrees outside. And that is a very good example of off-model risk for snow and ice storms, at least here in Texas. So there are some lessons learned, that's for sure. Now let's get into this gray zone. So I just slow launched a new training company called Gray Zone Activity. And that's my new training company. I'm hitting the road this year to teach intelligence and security courses across the country. I taught one class in 2020. It was in Nashville. And then due to the Chinese coronavirus, I ended up canceling for the rest of the year. And I didn't teach that many in 2019. But Gray Zone Activity, I have a course coming up this weekend in Austin. In March, I'll be in Salt Lake, and I'm adding 8 or 10 courses throughout the rest of this year. So head on over to www.grayzoneactivity.com. Click on the training tab, and you can check out my training schedule. I'll be teaching the tactical intelligence course, and then I've also got some kind of security courses, OPSEC, COMSEC, so on and so forth, on the practical level, mainly for emergency preparedness and community security. But more on that later. Let's talk about gray zone warfare. So gray zone warfare is a set of actions that press a conflict without actually starting a shooting war. And what happens is you have countries, you have nation states, and they push the envelope, right? China and Russia are very good at doing this to the United States. They basically say, what can we do against the Americans that will piss them off, that will agitate, that will frustrate them, but they're not going to start a shooting war over it. And they identify all these things they can do, and then they just go do them. And really what they're trying to do is wear out the United States. This is what they do in Ukraine, in Syria, in the South China Sea, in a number of other areas across the world. And they basically just try to wear down and exploit these areas like a failed or fragile state. And they're trying to achieve their regional objectives by doing this without actually starting a shooting war. Well, there's a book that I'm reading that outlines some CIA gray zone activities taken against the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Now, in addition to supporting the liberal intellectual class in the Soviet Union, CIA shopped books and films like Dr. Zhivago to Soviet outlets, which would then distribute these often unknowingly subversive materials. Here's a quote from author Boris Pasternak, who writes in Dr. Zhivago the novel, quote, revolutions are made by fanatical men of action with one-track mind. They overturn the old order in a few hours or days. The whole upheaval takes a few weeks or at most years, but the fanatical spirit that inspired the upheavals is worshipped for decades thereafter, for centuries, end quote. And that's a great example of the kind of subversive media that the agency seeded into the Soviet Union. And this was all towards fomenting a revolution. They wanted to topple the Soviet regime. And so, basically we have the United States Central Intelligence Agency spreading subversive material, seeding this subversive material in order to foment internal rebellion. And this is a gray zone activity because obviously the Soviet Union didn't start nuking the United States, because this, while it was warfare, did not rise to did not breach the threshold of conventional warfare. This was gray zone warfare aimed at internal disruption. Now, let's take this concept of what the United States did back during the Cold War, continues to do today, because we do it too. Now, we take that concept and just bear with me for one moment. French President Emmanuel Macron and other French intellectuals are renewing their complaints about the dangerous ideas emanating from U.S. college campuses. They're specifically warning of ideological excesses that lead to the, quote, ethnicization of the social question, end quote. These ideas on race, gender, the same stuff we're dealing with here in the United States, they're now dealing with over in France. Ideas on race, gender, post-colonialism, multiculturalism, forced diversity, what Macron described in October 2020 as, quote, certain social science theories entirely imported from the United States, end quote, are undermining French society, according to Macron and other government officials. Now, France is not, this is somewhat rich that Macron said this, because France is Foucault and, who's the other guy? Basically, the two very influential postmodernist intellectuals. These are the guys that basically started this whole thing, postmodernism. They're both French. I forget the other guy's name. But some of this stuff actually, the ball started rolling in France. It's just been propagated here in the United States. Well, Macron went so far as to warn that these ideas are, quote, breaking the Republic in two. They're breaking the French Republic in two. France's education minister last year remarked, quote, there's a battle to wage against an intellectual matrix from American universities. French professor François Cassé summarized what's happening. He said, quote, it's the sign of a small, frightened republic declining, provincializing, and which thus seeks those responsible for its decline, end quote. He's saying this is why Macron and the French government are now going after these dangerous ideas that are coming from U.S. college campuses. This sounds oddly similar to the gray zone activities that undermined Soviet society during the Cold War, which are now being propagated across the West. This is not just a United States thing. It's an Anglosphere, and really it's a European thing as well. Now, I'm not explicitly saying that America's current cultural revolution is the result of Cold War era gray zone tactics come home to roost, but maybe they are. As if our own internal disputes, our own political squabbles weren't enough, our domestic information environment is made even more complex, because now we have foreign involvement in our politics, and we have foreign countries manipulating public opinion through these information operations. So they're really muddying the water here for us. They're making life in America, they're going to make it much more difficult in the future. The United States today is, virtually by definition, a gray zone of subversive ideas and armed belligerent groups. It's a virtual certainty that foreign governments will become more involved. It's not just me. Virtually everybody thinks they're going to do more in the future. Political pundits and casual observers. have warned that another American Civil War is coming, and they are wrong. As I've been writing since 2016, it's already started. We're in the early stage of a low-intensity conflict, and regardless of the final form it takes, it's likely to be waged well into this decade. Now, given that gray zone warfare exists below conventional war, and it's being waged by domestic groups, if not foreign ones, gray zone warfare exists below conventional war. And because of that, it would behoove Americans to study gray skills like intelligence and security, like the stuff that I've been teaching since 2013. We teach these skills at Gray Zone Activity. And what I want to do is continue teaching the tactical intelligence course, continue teaching the security course, so that Americans can build up the soft skills that are required. Hard skills, things like firearms and tactics and that stuff. And what I'm trying to offer is soft skills for emergency preparedness and community security. So I'd like to invite you, I'm going to start blogging again, basically blogging again about how to do all this stuff. The stuff I talk about on YouTube and some of the stuff I talk about on Instagram is really geared towards DIY intelligence. How to build a local intelligence network, how to do battle tracking, how to build an area study, how to gather local information, because information is what enables decision making. Right? We have to have access to good information. And if you're in an emergency and you want to make real-time decisions, you're going to have real-time intelligence. And if you don't have access to real-time information, you're not producing real-time intelligence, and you may make some very poor decisions, some very poor real-time decisions, right? Anybody can make a decision. I want to be well-informed, especially if I have to make a time-sensitive decision. Like, I don't have 30 minutes to think about this, or I don't have 30 minutes to call friends and try to get some answers, or get online, or do whatever to try to get this information. It's time sensitive. I got to make this decision the next 15 seconds or the next minute. And if we don't already have our situational awareness put together, if we don't already have situational understanding, then decision making becomes a lot more difficult. I should say, well-informed decision making becomes a lot more difficult. So you can go sign up for the Gray Zone newsletter over at www.grayzoneactivity.com. And I'll just end with this. Forward Observer is not going anywhere. We still are going to produce a daily intelligence brief. We're going to continue to monitor the latest developments in our low-intensity conflict, really with a focus on how conflict is going to worsen in the future, because I do think low intensity is going to become higher intensity at some point this decade. I just don't know exactly what the triggers are, except to say we've got some potential triggers coming up, specifically around what the Biden administration is going to do with gun control here. So Gray Zone is a completely separate training effort, really to teach the skills of intelligence and security. And by the way, I have some friends in U.S. Army Special Operations, current and former guys, who are going to be teaching classes for us as well. As a matter of fact, last month, we put on a close target reconnaissance course here in Texas. And we're going to do that course again. We're going to have surveillance and reconnaissance courses, and all sorts of intelligence gathering courses come up, either taught by me or taught by some other guys. So that does it for today's show. Thanks for listening. Everyone, be well. And until next time, stay out front.